The quiet weight you carry, that pervasive sense that every act of kindness must be paid for, that your generosity is never truly a gift but an entry on a ledger. This is the ghost of narcissistic parenting lingering in your adult life. You learned early on that your genuine, open heart was a vulnerability, not a strength. Because the person who was supposed to be your safe harbor turned your love and natural compassion into a binding obligation. That initial, innocent desire to simply connect, to make your parent happy, was hijacked and warped into a survival strategy where your value was directly proportional to your utility, making every gentle impulse feel tainted by the transaction you know is coming. It is exhausting to live this way, constantly scanning the emotional horizon for the cost of simply being yourself. And this chronic state of hyper-awareness is the profound, silent suffering we're finally going to dismantle and understand today. You grew up in an environment where true emotional stability was a myth, an ever-shifting landscape dictated solely by your parents' fragile ego and volatile moods. You were a child yearning for the simple, unconditional anchor of parental love. But instead, you were met with a need so vast it felt like a black hole, constantly sucking the joy and peace out of the room until only their emotional state mattered. This is where the core pain began, the deep foundational crack, the realization, non-verbally communicated, that their comfort was your primary job, and your own needs were an inconvenient distraction that could provoke a chilling absence or outright anger. The natural response for a child whose very survival depends on the parent is to internalize this colossal responsibility, to mistakenly believe that if the parent is unhappy or unstable, it must be their own fault, a failure of their efforts. You became the tiny emotional caretaker, the one who tried to manage the unmanageable storms, sacrificing your authentic self for the illusion of control and the desperate hope of earning a moment of peace, or, better yet, a rare, transient nod of approval. This burden of managing an adult's entire emotional world is far too heavy for small shoulders. But you picked it up every single day, internalizing the belief that love was something you had to tirelessly manufacture, not something you inherently deserved. You learned to walk on emotional tiptoes, your entire sensory system calibrated to read the slightest facial twitch or shift in vocal tone, because those tiny indicators were the only reliable predictors of your momentary safety. The innocent act of helping or offering comfort, which should have been met with gratitude and reciprocity, was instead immediately cataloged by the narcissistic parent as a debt owed, an opening for future control or manipulation. This subtle, insidious pattern taught you that the purest parts of your heart, your compassion, your desire to help, your inherent kindness, were the very mechanisms through which you would be trapped and obligated. This constant performance of care, designed to keep the parent stable, left your own inner world neglected and profoundly empty, because you were always giving what you were desperately needing to receive. The child that longed for a safe lap and an affirming gaze was replaced by a miniature diplomat, a negotiator constantly working to broker peace and stability in a home that was fundamentally chaotic and unsafe. That initial, painful realization that your kindness was being monetized for the parent's emotional supply is the root trauma that continues to send tendrils into your adult relationships, making genuine, non-transactional connection feel almost impossible to trust. This dynamic quickly solidified into a painful parentification, an inversion of the natural order where the child becomes the emotional adult, and the parent retreats into a perpetual state of demanding childhood. You ceased to be a child, allowed to simply explore and be imperfect. You became a functional object, a source of regulation and ego-boosting for the narcissistic parent. Your childhood memories are not of carefree play, but of monitoring, of taking on the emotional weight of a crisis that was never yours, constantly performing the role of the mature, grounded stabilizer in an environment lacking all grounding. You developed a staggering premature skill for reading the environment, a relentless emotional literacy that could detect the slightest atmospheric pressure drop long before a storm was visible to anyone else. This wasn't intuition. It was a survival mechanism born of necessity, forcing you to develop an internal emotional radar focused outward, perpetually searching for the next disaster to avert before it engulfed you. That profound need to know, to read the room, to anticipate every possible need, was the only way you could maintain the fragile stability that kept you safe and kept your parent functional. The tragedy of this role inversion is that the child's natural desire to please and connect is weaponized, making the acts of service less about love and more about preemptive defense against emotional abandonment or punitive withdrawal. Every time you stepped up, every time you comforted their distress or fixed their problems, the boundary between parent and child eroded further, cementing the disastrous belief that the only way to be loved was to be eternally useful. This is why, even as an adult, you might feel a compulsive need to offer solutions or take charge in every relationship, because your inner world still defaults to the role of stabilizer. Your entire sense of self was constructed around this utility, this relentless, never-ending duty to the emotional world of another, leaving you with no clear map of who you are when you are not actively doing for someone else. The original child, the one who simply wanted to be cherished for existing, retreated deep inside, leaving the performer in charge of your life. The one who skillfully manages expectations and constantly anticipates the next payment demanded for a past kindness. This reversal of roles is the silent engine driving your adult avoidance of genuine vulnerability. Because you know, on a cellular level, what happens when you stop performing. What we are describing, the emotional hijacking of your authentic self, is deeply rooted in parentification and the subsequent development of hypervigilance, two psychological survival responses enacted with heartbreaking innocence. Parentification is not merely helping with chores. It's the systematic emotional burdening of a child with the needs and problems of the adult, forcing them to function as a peer or caretaker, which fundamentally distorts their development. It's the constant, unspoken expectation that your primary role is to attend to your parents' psychological welfare, not your own. This prolonged exposure to an unstable system creates the shadow of hypervigilance, not as a choice, but as a necessary biological adaptation, where your nervous system became permanently tuned to detect threat. It's the reason your muscles are always tense, why you find rest so difficult, and why you can read the mood of a room of strangers in seconds, instantly identifying the dominant emotion and figuring out how to neutralize it. This is the body's wisdom desperately trying to protect the inner child, which learned early that a moment's lapse in attention could lead to emotional chaos or a narcissistic injury that would invariably bounce back onto you. The core survival belief that takes hold is that kindness is a transactional commodity, a psychological mechanism that protects you from the pain of genuine exploitation. You offer help, but simultaneously brace for the cost, because your lived experience has taught you that pure, free-flowing generosity does not exist. It always has a string attached, a debt to be repaid in compliance, loyalty, or self-sacrifice. This understanding is a necessary shield, but it tragically prevents you from receiving true kindness in adulthood without suspicion or the immediate need to reciprocate in an overwhelming way. This internal wiring makes you feel immensely responsible for the emotional states of those around you, an emotional reflex that is not empathy, but a trained survival response rooted in fear of repercussion. If someone you care about is upset, your deepest, most primal programming tells you that you must fix it, stabilize it, or take the responsibility onto yourself, simply to regulate your own internal alarm system. Understanding this as a survival response, a mechanism designed to help a small child survive an emotionally unsafe home, is the first step in granting yourself the necessary compassion to let that burden go. To survive this demanding environment, the authentic self, the genuine, messy, imperfect child, had to disappear, replaced by a meticulously constructed performer identity. This mask was not a conscious fabrication, but a necessary self-erasure, a complete recalibration of who you were allowed to be in order to secure acceptance and safety from your narcissistic parent. You became the version of you that was useful, successful, quiet, agreeable, or exceptional, whatever flavor of performance was most likely to garner a positive, or at least neutral, reaction. The essential, core tragedy is that you began to believe the performance was you, making it excruciatingly difficult to distinguish between your true self and the high-functioning people-pleasing character you perfected over years. This is the root of the I-self disappearance, the feeling of profound emptiness when you stop performing, because the genuine self was exiled early on, relegated to the shadows to protect it from the constant, intrusive demands of the parent. You know how to be the perfect student, the reliable friend, the dependable employee, but you may have no idea how to simply be a person with complex, non-productive feelings and needs. This performer identity is incredibly effective in the outside world. You might be highly successful, deeply respected, and the person everyone relies on, but it operates at an immense, exhausting cost to your soul. Every interaction, even positive ones, is mediated by this mask, forcing you to constantly edit, censor, and shape your responses based on what the other person expects or needs. It is the internal narrative of "I am only safe loved if I provide X," a loop that never allows for genuine rest or authentic expression, always forcing you to chase the next external validation. The narcissistic parent, in a devastating irony, often takes credit for the success of this performer, pointing to your achievements as proof of their superior parenting, further cementing the belief that your value is solely tied to external recognition. This makes the mask feel even more essential, as it seems to be the only thing that maintains the parent's approval and, tragically, your own sense of earned worth. The path to healing requires the terrifying act of allowing the performer to slowly retire, a process that feels like walking naked into a cold room, but which is essential for the long-exiled self to finally re-emerge. Deep beneath the adult's polished performance and chronic competence, the inner child remains, frozen in time, still carrying the silent, profound wound of their unmet needs. This is not a metaphor. It is the part of your psyche that internalized the original trauma. And it is still waiting for the soothing, the validation, and the unconditional love that never came. This child is desperately lonely, burdened by the adult-sized responsibilities they were forced to bear, and confused by the constant emotional inversion of the home. The deepest, most profound unmet need of this inner child is not for things, but for emotional presence. For a parent to simply hold space for their feelings without judging them, correcting them, or making them about themselves. This is why, as an adult, a simple act of genuine, non-demanding listening from a friend can sometimes bring you to tears, because it connects you to that deep, primal yearning for someone to just see you, without immediately needing something in return. The adult can logically understand the past, but the inner child still feels the ache of that essential, parental absence. This silent wound manifests in a constant, low-level emotional noise, a pervasive feeling of not enoughness, no matter what you achieve or what you are given. The voice of the inner child is often muffled by the demanding voice of the internalized parent, but it leaks out in moments of vulnerability. In intense, overwhelming emotional reactions to minor perceived slights, in cycles of self-sabotage, or in an inability to accept simple compliments. The adult self might manage the world, but the inner child is still reacting to a threat that is decades old. Healing is fundamentally about turning the adult's immense capacity for care, which was always directed outward toward the narcissistic parent, and redirecting it inward toward this wounded child. It means finally giving the child permission to feel, to be imperfect, and to simply be held by your own compassionate awareness, something they never received. The first step in breaking the cycle of transactional kindness is to offer yourself unconditional kindness, a pure, non-productive generosity that starts to fill that cavernous space the narcissistic parent created. The shadow of this transactional childhood does not stay in the past. It shows up fully formed in your adult life, subtly sabotaging your relationships and your internal sense of well-being. You find yourself consistently drawn to emotionally demanding people, those who require your management, your problem-solving, or your sacrifice, because this dynamic feels tragically familiar and, therefore, safe, a repetition of the only way you know how to love and be loved. True, balanced reciprocity feels foreign, even boring, because it doesn't engage your core survival programming. Your fundamental sense of self-worth becomes entangled with your productivity and your ability to meet the needs of others, meaning you cannot genuinely rest without feeling intense, paralyzing guilt or anxiety. Rest, for you, is not a birthright. It is a luxury that must be earned by extreme effort, a concept that immediately connects back to the childhood belief that you must be useful to justify your existence. The deep consequence is a chronic low-grade burnout, a nervous system constantly firing because stopping feels like inviting the old, familiar threat of abandonment. In relationships, you struggle immensely with trust and emotional regulation. You anticipate betrayal, constantly expecting the other shoe to drop, because your primary model of a foundational relationship was one where kindness was a currency for control. When a partner or friend gives freely, you might subconsciously test them or feel suspicious, unable to accept that a gift can be given without a demanding price tag attached. And in moments of intense emotion, you either suppress it completely, fearing the narcissistic parent's punitive reaction, or you erupt in an overwhelming way, having never learned how to safely self-soothe. This pattern makes setting boundaries feel like a hostile act of war, an aggressive move that will inevitably lead to emotional warfare or abandonment. Because the narcissistic parent taught you that your boundaries were an insult to their needs. Your inability to say a simple no, without a massive internal panic, is the quiet evidence that the original transactional contract is still in force. The healing comes when you recognize that the deep need to fix and manage everyone else is actually an avoidance of your own core needs, a constant external focus to avoid the painful emptiness of the inner wound. The impulse to sacrifice your own authenticity for the stability of a relationship is rooted in a primal, biological imperative: the instinctual need for attachment. For a child, attachment to the primary caregiver is a non-negotiable survival necessity. The brain would rather endure chronic emotional pain than risk separation or complete abandonment, which registers as a death threat. Therefore, when faced with a narcissistic parent, the child's brain makes a devastating raison but logical choice. I will sacrifice my truth, my feelings, and my needs if it means I can maintain this essential connection. This is not a character flaw. It is the ultimate expression of your brain's commitment to keeping you alive, forcing you to develop the coping styles that were most effective in securing the parent's continued minimal engagement. The child reasons, emotionally and instinctively, that a small, fractured piece of connection, bought by endless compliance and performance, is safer than the total void of separation. This survival bargain is struck so early and so deeply that it feels like the default setting of your heart, the underlying logic to all your adult relational decisions. When you offer a kindness today and instantly feel that internal lurch of obligation or resentment, you are not reacting to the present situation. You are experiencing the nervous system memory of that original sacrifice of authenticity. It is the echo of the child who knew they had to give up a piece of their truth to survive, and the adult system is still on high alert for the impending cost. This explains why you might feel intensely drained after giving, even when the person you are helping is genuinely kind and appreciative. The transaction is happening on a subconscious, historical level. The process of healing involves consciously challenging this instinctual reasoning, gently teaching your body and your heart that attachment no longer requires the sacrifice of authenticity. You must prove to your nervous system, through repeated small acts of boundary setting and self-affirmation, that you can be honest, you can be imperfect, and you can say no, and the world will not end, and you will not be abandoned. It is the slow, deliberate work of convincing a highly intelligent, coy, but deeply traumatized survival mechanism that the threat is now over. The long-term emotional and relational effects of this transactional training are profound, forming an internal architecture that makes true intimacy feel like a minefield. Your internal narratives are dominated by a hypercritical, judgmental voice, a direct echo of the narcissistic parent that constantly tells you you are failing, you are selfish, or you are about to be exposed as an inadequate fraud. This narrative is the unseen warden, ensuring you never truly relax, constantly driving you back into the performance of utility to silence the crushing self-doubt. One of the most insidious consequences is the development of specific coping styles designed to manage the emotional instability of others, which now prevent you from having your own genuine emotional experience. You may become a chronic intellectualizer, always discussing feelings in abstract EQ conceptual terms to avoid the risk of actually feeling them. Or you may resort to compulsive people-pleasing, sacrificing your comfort to manage the comfort of the other. These styles were once lifelines, but now they are emotional barriers, walling you off from the very connection you crave. You may find yourself in cyclical patterns of pushing people away when they get too close, just as they start to see the person behind the mask, because true vulnerability feels like inviting inevitable exploitation. This is the tragic outcome of having your kindness turned into obligation. You conclude that closeness is too dangerous, that the risk of being used or betrayed is too high, and the unconscious solution is to maintain a safe, emotionally distant perimeter around your true self. You hold others at arm's length with your competence, preventing the genuine intimacy that would expose the wounded child inside. The most difficult consequence to face is the quiet, chronic emptiness that no external achievement can fill, the hollowness that results from a lifetime spent focused outward, never inward. This emptiness is the space where your authentic self should have grown, but it was crowded out by the endless demands of the performance. The work of healing is the slow, gentle process of beginning to fill that void with your own presence, your own validation, and the profound, unconditional kindness you were never modeled. Finally reclaiming the ability to simply exist without having to constantly justify your space in the world. If you recognize yourself in this description, in the constant battle between your kind heart and the fear of obligation, you are not alone. So many people carry this silent burden, and naming it is the first brave step toward setting it down. I want to ask you a question that validates the immense effort you've put in to survive. What is the one coping strategy, the one way you constantly do for others, that you are most tired of carrying? Please take a moment and comment below, even if it's just copying and pasting this phrase. I am tired of paying for kindness. Your vulnerability helps break the isolation for everyone here. The beginning of the true healing journey is not about fixing or changing, but about the radical, compassionate act of awareness and witnessing. This means shining a light on the transactional pattern, not with judgment or self-criticism, but with the gentle curiosity of an observer. You must be willing to watch your adult self in real time, noticing the moment you offer a kindness and simultaneously brace for the cost, or the second you start to take responsibility for someone else's mood, and simply name it. Ah, there is the old pattern, the survival reflex that once protected me. This act of witnessing is the first conscious separation between the adult you are now and the child you were, creating the necessary psychological space to choose a different response. It is the powerful, quiet moment where you stop running on autopilot and realize that you are no longer in that childhood home, and you no longer have to pay the emotional tax. This is where you begin the critical process of breaking self-gaslighting, that pervasive, dismissive voice that tells you, "It wasn't that bad. You're overreacting. You're being selfish." A voice that is merely the internalization of your narcissistic parent's denial. To witness is to validate your own reality. To look back at that child's experience and finally say, yes, that was profoundly unfair. You were put in an impossible position, and your survival strategy was brilliant and necessary. This is the first profound act of self-kindness, granting yourself the truth that was constantly denied by the parent who needed your reality to conform to their preferred narrative. The work is simply sitting with the discomfort of this truth, refusing to let the self-gaslighting voice silence the quiet, painful testimony of your inner world. The deep importance of witnessing is that it moves the experience from a felt, unconscious trauma to a conscious, manageable memory, taking away its power to control your present decisions. It means acknowledging the transactional nature of your past without allowing it to define the potential of your future relationships. Gently teaching yourself that the external world is not a monolith of demands. Awareness is the key that unlocks the prison door, proving that you can look at the deepest pain without being destroyed by it, and that the only true obligation you have now is to your own truth. The cruel paradox of being an adult child of a narcissistic parent is that you are often a high-functioning adult, immensely competent and successful, but you carry a deep, internal survival wound that undermines all your external achievements. You excel in the professional world because the performance identity is so robust, capable of meeting demands, managing crises, and exceeding expectations, but this very success becomes an additional burden, a higher bar for the mask to clear. The world sees your strength, but you feel the bone-deep fatigue of constant effort. This wound manifests as a chronic responsibility that stretches far beyond the professional sphere, making you the default emotional support for almost everyone in your life, because you cannot bear to see others struggle. The original programming of "I must fix this or chaos will ensue" is still driving the car, compelling you to step in, rescue, and stabilize, even when you are desperately needing to be the one supported. You may have a profound difficulty in delegating, trusting that only you can truly manage things, which is the child's belief that they were the only competent adult in the room. The wound also compels emotional suppression, a lifetime habit of swallowing your own feelings because they were perceived as dangerous, inconvenient, or a direct challenge to the narcissistic parent's emotional dominance. You have perfected the art of compartmentalization, tucking away your authentic distress to ensure you remain functional for the needs of the moment. This leads to a constant, low-level emotional numbness, making you feel distant even when you are physically present, because the true self is still hiding beneath layers of perfected composure. The task here is to allow the high-functioning performance to be seen not as your worth, but as a monument to your survival, and to gently reprioritize the needs of the tired inner core. It means practicing the radical act of not being responsible, allowing a friend to manage their own distress, letting a task be done imperfectly by someone else, and sitting with the overwhelming anxiety that arises when you stop actively managing the world. Your competence is a fact, but it is not your identity, and the high-functioning adult must now learn to integrate the necessary human right to be messy and simply be cared for. The legacy of narcissistic parenting is not just a collection of memories, it is a physical and psychological experience, showing up as ongoing, subtle patterns that continue to regulate your body and mind in the present. You may notice the persistent pattern of breath holding, a shallow, restricted breathing style that is the body's attempt to brace for impact, a relic of the constant tension you carried in your childhood home. It's the physical manifestation of keeping yourself small, quiet, and unobtrusive, hoping to go unnoticed by the demanding parental gaze. Another profound pattern is the relentless habit of permission seeking, the internal hesitation and immediate scan for external validation before you can allow yourself a simple pleasure or make a basic decision, before you buy something for yourself, before you rest, before you express an opinion. There is that momentary, almost imperceptible freeze, a need to check with an invisible authority figure who still resides inside your head. This is the internalized parent's voice, ensuring you never step too far out of line, ensuring all your kindness and resources are directed away from yourself. This legacy also manifests in a disproportionate level of shame attached to your basic human needs, feeling deeply guilty for being hungry, tired, or simply wanting something for yourself without an immediate, productive justification. You were taught that your needs were a burden, an inconvenience that disrupted the parent's narrative, and that feeling continues to color your adult self-care, turning acts of simple replenishment into morally charged issues. This is why self-care can feel so profoundly difficult. It means defying the core legacy of self-denial. Recognizing this legacy means acknowledging the depth of the training, honoring the child who had to adopt these patterns to survive, and then consciously, gently introducing a new way of being. It involves the intentional practice of deep, restorative breathing, the conscious choice to act before seeking external permission, and the radical acceptance that your needs are legitimate and require no external justification. This recognition turns the subtle patterns from automatic programming into conscious choices that can finally be disrupted and replaced with freedom. The path to transforming the transactional nature of your kindness is found in the deep, gentle work of the repainting process, turning inward to give your inner child all the elements of unconditional love that were consistently withheld. This is not about fixing the past, but about showing up consistently in the present as the warm, affirming, protective parent you always needed, but never received. It is a slow, methodical effort to close the deficit that was created when your needs were perpetually ignored in favor of your parents. This process begins with inner child healing, which is simply the act of listening, validating, and caring for that wounded part of you. When you feel overwhelmed, anxious, or profoundly inadequate, you pause and ask the adult self to show up for the child self. holding them and assuring them that they are safe, that they are not responsible for anyone else's feelings, and that they are loved simply for being. You are giving the inner child a corrective experience, a moment of unconditional safety that begins to rewrite the deepest, most painful memories. The core practice of reparenting is giving what was not received, actively identifying the emotional nourishment you lacked. Unconditional acceptance, emotional mirroring, reliable safety, and the celebration of your imperfect self, and then delivering it to yourself. If your parent needed you to be a flawless performer, you reparent by granting yourself the radical permission to fail, to be messy, and to be openly imperfect without fearing abandonment. Every act of self-compassion is a direct challenge to the transactional contract that defined your childhood. This process requires immense patience and self-forgiveness, understanding that you are undoing a lifetime of deeply embedded survival programming that was necessary at the time. Reparenting is not a sudden epiphany. It is the daily, moment-to-moment commitment to showing up for yourself, to honoring your needs, and to proving to your inner world that your own kind heart is finally trustworthy and free of demands. It is the slow, quiet revolution of reclaiming your right to be truly loved, starting with the deepest, most necessary love, your own. Please know that you are not on this journey alone. Every person who breaks this cycle contributes to a movement of healing and self-reclamation. If this process of reparenting and understanding your survival patterns resonates with you, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. By joining our community, you ensure you don't miss the practical tools and the deep emotional support we offer, helping you continue to find your way back to your authentic, non-performative self. Your journey matters, and we are here to walk it with you. The continuation of healing requires the brave, difficult work known as shadow work, which is the process of turning toward the pain, the shame, and the denied parts of yourself with radical honesty and open acceptance. This is the essential step of moving beyond surface-level coping, requiring you to actively sit with the deep grief that arises when you fully realize the magnitude of what you were denied. The safety, the unconditional love, and the freedom of a normal childhood. You must give yourself permission to feel the full weight of that loss. The core of this process is acknowledging and integrating the parts of yourself that you have judged as unacceptable, often the parts that the narcissistic parent shamed or rejected, your vulnerability, your neediness, your anger, or your imperfection. This work means recognizing that the things you most fear and suppress are merely the exiled parts of your authentic self that were deemed too dangerous for the transactional environment of your home. You must welcome these shadow aspects back into the light of your consciousness, understanding that they hold vital information about your unmet needs. Shadow work requires honesty that is often profoundly uncomfortable, forcing you to look at the ways you perpetuate the transactional pattern in your own life, perhaps in your hypercritical self-talk or your need to control external outcomes. It means owning your reactive parts, your moments of anger or resentment, not to punish yourself, but to understand what they are trying to protect, or what they are desperately trying to communicate. True integration only happens when you stop fighting with yourself and start listening to the entire complex landscape of your internal world. This is the ultimate confrontation with the internalized parent, a profound, internal reckoning that allows you to stop projecting the shame and judgment onto yourself. By sitting with your grief, by refusing to rush past the pain, you release the emotional energy that was locked away in the trauma, finally freeing it up to fuel your growth. Shadow work is the necessary bridge between recognizing the pattern and truly changing it, moving from intellectual understanding to deep, embodied, and lasting emotional freedom. The transactional pattern learned in childhood shows up in adulthood through concrete, painful relational examples that repeat the cycle of self-sacrifice and obligation. You may find yourself constantly being the one to give extravagant gifts, to over-apologize, or to perform elaborate acts of service immediately following any conflict or perceived slight in a relationship. This is the child's desperate attempt to pay the emotional debt, to proactively buy back acceptance before the other person can withdraw their attention or affection. Repeating the pattern of purchasing safety with kindness. Another common example is the inability to receive a simple compliment or act of help without immediately diminishing it or over-reciprocating, treating the gesture as an unbearable obligation that must be instantly discharged. When a partner offers comfort, you might shut down or quickly change the subject, because the unconscious mind interprets the act of receiving as putting yourself in a vulnerable, indebted position that the narcissistic parent would exploit. Your system cannot tolerate a gift without a demand. You might also notice a painful pattern of entering into codependent relationships, choosing partners who subtly or overtly require you to manage their life, their career, or their emotions, because this is the only dynamic that feels intuitively like love. The kindness you offer is not genuine, not non-demanding generosity, but the performing of care, the familiar, comforting role of the stabilizer that allows you to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of simply asking for your own needs to be met. You feel most valuable when you are exhausted from giving. The most challenging example is the subtle, but constant, testing of trust, pushing away good, healthy people who offer non-transactional kindness, because their pure generosity contradicts your core belief that love is conditional. You may unconsciously create drama or distance to provoke a familiar reaction, simply because the peace and easy flow of a healthy relationship feels inherently suspicious and profoundly unsafe. The healing is in stopping the testing, allowing the discomfort of pure, non-demanding acceptance to simply settle and be true. To truly dismantle the transactional contract of your childhood, you must return to the source of the deficit and ask the foundational questions that your parent never allowed you to voice. The most important question is a simple, heart-centered one. What did my inner child need? This is not a question of material things, but a deep exploration of the essential emotional needs that were consistently ignored, shamed, or denied during your formative years. Did your inner child need to be witnessed without judgment? Did they need to be allowed to feel angry without provoking a terrifying eruption from the parent? Did they need the simple, steady affirmation that their opinions mattered and that they were inherently worthy of love, regardless of their performance or utility? When you name these specific, profound needs, you give the adult self a clear, actionable mandate for the reparenting process, turning vague feelings of emptiness into concrete steps toward integration. Another foundational question to ask is, if I had been given the unconditional love and safety I needed, who would I be today? This question invites you to bypass the performer identity and connect with the spontaneous, authentic self that was forced into exile. It provides a vision of freedom, a guiding star for your healing, showing you that the goal is not to become a new person, but to recover the person who was always meant to be, the one who was obscured by the necessary mask of survival. These questions shift the focus from what the parent did to what the child lacked, which empowers you to finally take control of the narrative and the solution. The answers reveal the exact nature of the emotional debt that you have been unconsciously trying to repay in your adult relationships, proving that the constant giving to others is merely an attempt to fill the inner deficit that only self-compassion can truly touch. The clarity of these foundational answers is the key to creating a new, non-transactional future. The process of transformation is the shift from the anxious, transactional survival mode to a state of safety, boundaries, and authenticity, where your kindness can flow freely without the crippling fear of the cost. The first sign of true change is the profound, internal feeling of safety, a settling of the nervous system that no longer feels compelled to scan the environment for threat or to endlessly perform to maintain peace. This safety is not found in external validation, but in the internal commitment to protect your own emotional landscape. This new sense of safety enables the organic development of firm, flexible boundaries, which are no longer felt as an aggressive act but as a simple, necessary definition of self. You can say no without a massive internal panic, because you know that your worth is not tied to your compliance, and you trust that your true connections will honor your limits. Boundaries are the physical and emotional evidence that the transactional contract has been terminated and that your time, energy, and resources are no longer for sale. The culmination of this transformation is the reemergence of authenticity, a profound, quiet relief that comes from finally allowing yourself to be seen as imperfect, messy, and fully human, without the fear of catastrophic consequence. Your kindness then becomes pure, non-demanding generosity, because it is rooted in abundance, not in deficit or debt. You give because you genuinely want to, not because you desperately need to secure your worth or buy your safety. This is a profound shift from a life of emotional scarcity to one of genuine emotional freedom. This transformed state allows for the development of reciprocity in relationships that is balanced, easy, and free of obligation, where both giving and receiving feel natural and comfortable. You stop being the tireless provider and allow others to show up for you, trusting that you are loved simply for being, not for constantly doing. The new pattern emerges as a deep, quiet sense of peace, the knowledge that the adult you have become is finally the safe, nurturing harbor that the child you were always desperately needed. The ancient wisdom traditions speak often of the necessity of presence, a concept that is profoundly relevant to your healing journey, particularly within the trauma of transactional kindness. The spiritual teacher Ram Dass spoke to this necessary shift when he said, "The next message you need is always right where you are." This simple truth is the counter-narrative to the hypervigilance and external focus demanded by your narcissistic parent. In the context of the adult child of a narcissistic parent, this message reminds you that the solution to the chronic transactional cycle is not found in the next achievement, the next relationship, or the next performance, but in the radical act of being present to your own internal experience. Your parent forced you to live outside of yourself, constantly focused on their needs. But the deepest wisdom you need to heal is located inside your body, in the feeling of your breath, the tension in your shoulders, and the quiet whisper of your inner child. The transactional pattern compels you to constantly project into the future. What will they demand? What do I owe next? Or to remain trapped in the past. I was used. I am indebted. Presence is the only antidote, the only moment where you are truly free of the narcissistic contract. When you allow yourself to fully inhabit the present moment, without the need to manage, control, or perform, you reclaim the power that was taken from you, grounding yourself in a reality where you are finally sovereign. Healing is the commitment to this presence, the practice of continually returning to the reality that you are here, now, and safe. Disrupting the historical narrative that your kindness must always be an entry on a ledger. The most important message you need is that you are enough, right now, exactly as you are. A profound and simple truth that the child in you was never allowed to believe, but which the conscious adult must now prove through the daily commitment to simple, unedited presence. The ultimate goal of this work is not to become a new person, or to erase the painful history, but to engage in the profound act of reclaiming identity, the process of slowly shedding the survival mask to reveal the whole, authentic self that was always there. Healing is not about becoming fundamentally different. It is about recovering the inherent goodness, the spontaneous joy, and the essential boundaries that were surgically removed by the need to survive a transactional environment. You are not broken and in need of being fixed. You are a whole person who was forced to build an incredibly sophisticated, high-performing defense system, and the healing is simply the process of allowing that system to finally stand down. The kindness you offer in the future will not be a new, improved kind of kindness. It will be the return of your original, untainted compassion, now protected by a clear understanding of your value and firm, loving boundaries. This realization removes the pressure of self-transformation. The profound shift in this redefined healing is moving from a focus on doing, the constant performance of the survivor, to a focus on being, allowing yourself the radical right to simply exist without justification. The reclaimed identity is the part of you that knows, intrinsically, that your worth is not tied to your output, your achievements, or your utility to others, but is a non-negotiable fact of your existence. This is the ultimate freedom from the narcissistic parent's ledger. This work means celebrating your survival, honoring the strength it took to carry that burden, and then gently integrating the exiled self back into your life, accepting all your flaws and needs as valid and worthy of love. Healing is not a finish line. It is the continuous, compassionate commitment to showing up for yourself, reclaiming your voice, and proving to your inner child that their innate goodness is finally safe to be expressed in the world without a price tag. The journey of transformation culminates in a beautiful, profound ending integration, the moment where the high-functioning adult finally reaches back and embraces the wounded inner child, becoming whole and complete. This integration is the realization that the strongest part of you is not the performance or the hyper-competence, but the courage it took to survive and the self-compassion it takes to finally heal. You are no longer two separate entities, the performer and the wounded, but a single, integrated self. This reconnection with your inner child allows you to bring their wisdom, their unedited needs, their fierce honesty, their capacity for pure joy, back into your adult life, enriching your relationships and your internal experience. The child's pain is finally held, validated and integrated, no longer a hidden driver of your adult decisions, allowing your kindness to flow from a place of genuine fulfillment, not a desperate need for validation or safety. The debt has been fully paid, not to anyone else, but to yourself. The new narrative you carry is one of empowerment, a profound understanding that you are the author of your future, no longer bound by the old, transactional contract of the past. Your life is no longer about managing other people's feelings or chasing external approval. It is about expressing your authentic self, setting boundaries with love, and trusting that the purest parts of your heart are now safe to be shared with a world that is capable of true reciprocity. The weight you carried is finally set down, not forgotten, but transformed into wisdom. Take a deep breath and feel the truth of this freedom. The kindness that flows from you now is no longer an obligation, but a gift, a reflection of the deep, unconditional kindness you have finally given to yourself. You are whole, you are free, and you are inherently worthy. May you walk forward with this newfound peace,